Friends, I'm Aaron Stauffer. I am zooming in from Kansas City, where my family and I just moved from Nashville, Tennessee. I work with and through Vanderbilt Divinity School with the Religion and Justice program. A lot of the work that we do there is working with congregations and organizers to help them ground their faith and their spiritual practices in traditions of economic democracy and building economic power. I'm a Presbyterian, PCUSA ordained pastor. So what the Reverend was saying earlier about baptism as being a new way of living really resonated so deeply with me. About understanding how it is that our baptism is not something that just happened once, but something that continues to structure and shape and inform how it is we are together. So I'm really grateful for that. Thank you for that. Thank you for this time tonight. I want to talk a little bit about two figures that I draw on a lot for when I'm working with churches and helping them understand the importance of economic and political democracy, about alternatives to capitalism and how many of these alternatives to capitalism are deeply grounded in faith traditions that they just aren't aware of. And one of those traditions that I feel really passionate about is what I'm calling, and others are calling this too, the radical social gospel. So many of y'all, maybe some of y'all have heard of social gospelers. These are people who, at the turn of the 20th century, believed that the Bible had something to say about social problems and that Christians were compelled by their faith to transform the structures of society in the directions of social justice, as my advisor, Gary Dorian, nicely summed up. I like that. Transforming the structures of society in the direction of social justice. But in the stories of the social gospel, it's often the most radical ones who are erased. And some of those that I want to lift up were those who were doing some of the most radical organizing in some of the most difficult situations in the South, particularly in the U.S. South. Let's be clear. We've got a solid analysis of why that organizing is crucial. And these two figures were Howard Kester and Claude Williams. Howard Kester is an interesting guy because he grew up in Martinsville, Virginia. He watched his dad drift in and then drift out of the KKK. And Williams found himself searching for places that could teach him how to minister to his rural Virginia churches. He went to Princeton Seminary at first after going to Lynchburg College. He was involved in the YMCA and with lots of other social justice organizations, but found himself at Princeton being ill-equipped with the right theological tools, and so left and ended up organizing with the Fellowship of Peace, down in the South to be a lynching investigator. And so he was hired by the NAACP and others to go undercover and investigate lynchings. His time down in the South, in the deep South in Mississippi and Alabama, led him to multiple times himself to being killed. And that drew him then to deeper conversations with other partners who were walking with him around what Christianity had to say about capitalism, about racism, and how it is that he could continue to make a difference in his community and engaging in congregations in this way. That drew him to Vanderbilt Divinity School. And there's the sort of connection for me, is that he went to Vanderbilt in 1926, and was there for about 2 or 3 years. During his time at Vanderbilt, he met, over a summer term, Claude Williams. Claude is the sort of the opposite here of Kester. Kester grew up middle class. Williams grew up dirt poor. His family were sharecroppers in Western Tennessee, Holy Roller Pentecostal Cumberland Presbyterians. And so he understood the power of church because it had transformed his own community and his own family's life. When he was young, one of his uncles came up to him and said, "Son, when are you going to take up your good work to do?" And William said, "What good work?" And he said, "Well, to preach." So he'd always been sort of called by the church to this work. He went to a Cumberland Presbyterian seminary, but ended up dropping out because it was too conservative. He took charge of 2 Presbyterian churches right outside of Nashville, Tennessee, and then found out that a professor at Vanderbilt, Alva Taylor, was offering a social ethics class in the social gospel. So he took that class, and that's where he met Kester. Now, Kester and Williams were involved in many different social justice efforts and racial justice efforts during their time in Vanderbilt. They attempted to integrate many of the racial justice meetings in Nashville at that time. They worked with then a college right across the street from Vanderbilt called Scarrett Bennett. Scarrett Bennett College at that point also joined them. Some of the faculty did in trying to integrate some of their meetings and some of the organizations, primarily of the YMCA. That led to the firing of some of the pastors and professors at Scarrett. But there was a big change all of a sudden when Williams moved out to Paris, Arkansas. And this is when he tried to start essentially what's called a labor church. Because he found that many of the congregations that he was working with would be fine with his preaching, but as soon as he started to move the church in the directions of what it is he wanted to, what he was preaching about, things got tricky. The sessions had problems with what he was doing. It sounded heretical. And a labor church at this time, many of these labor churches were part of the labor movement and the socialist parties at this time. These were unorthodox gatherings of Christians, say, not led by a pastor, but were instead made up primarily of working people, poor folk. And they worshiped the way that they wanted to worship. They practiced communion in the way that they wanted to practice it. And these labor churches stood up for them in their union battles and their labor battles, housed them when they needed to house, when they were out of work and when their families couldn't afford rent. Then they were perhaps some of the most truest expressions of church at this time. That work led to Kester eventually getting kicked out of the next 3 churches, I think, that he was a part of, eventually getting defrocked by the PCUSA and others. But it led to him working with an organization that Kester introduced him to, called the Southern Tenant Farmers Union. Now, the STFU was organizing in the Arkansas and the Mississippi Delta throughout the 1930s and into the 40s and 50s, but its highest time was the mid-30s, I believe. This is when tens of thousands of white and black tenant farmers came together to organize to transform the structures of their society in the directions of social justice. The culture of the organizing of the Southern Tenant Farmers Union was grounded in black churches and grounded in white churches. Many lay preachers were organizers themselves because they were the people who knew the people. And they were able to bring the messages about what campaigns they were carrying out and how it is that they could organize to the people. Now, STFU was not taken too kindly by Arkansas or by the federal government for a long time, even until its demise in the 50s. But what's most important about this is understanding for me that Kester and Williams found themselves called to these true movements, to the deepest expression of human pain, and they organized there because they felt called to that work. That to be a Christian called them to that work. Organizing in these conditions was not kind. This is some of the harshest conditions, just even in terms of physical health. For many of the tenant farmers, housing and food situations were deeply horrendous. And also just the living conditions there. This is a place where malaria and many other mosquito-borne diseases, cholera, were rampant. And so you're organizing in extremely, extremely difficult situations. And yet Williams and Kester went. They could have gone other places, but they went there. One of the reasons why it's really important for me to lift up figures like Williams and Kester is the example they give to churches today about the true call of what it means to be Christian. As it means to build up and organize with the poor. Because that's the place where the transformation of our structures of society will take place. I want to close by talking about two things. The first is the importance of building power. For Kester and Williams and the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, they were organizing in order for them to build power, because they knew that they needed more than just God on their side. They needed to build real economic and political power in order to have deep success. And the way that they felt that they built power was by bringing more and more people together, putting them through an educational process, and having them take action over the forces that govern their own lives. This is what it meant to build democracy, to build economic democracy. They knew this had to be a class-based movement, because politics is driven by money in the first place. And they also knew that it had to be done relationally. Power is different from influence or manipulation. Power is always about a relationship. And it's about being able to change as much as about being able to change others. Strong organizations are the ones that are able to adapt. Brittle churches can't change with the times. This is an extremely important example for many of the congregations that I travel in. And it offers us a space of hope to continue to ask the question of what it would mean to live into being baptized by a spiritual fire. So thank you all for the time today and for being a movement family.